We all have this grid that we've formulated from those answers. Who am I? What's my worth? What's my value? What am I going to become? And those childhood events, especially from our dads, answers those questions. See, God designed our hearts to receive answers from the voice of a father. And the first voice we hear as kids is our dad's. That's the first voice of a father we hear. Or we don't hear. It's very foundational, this very primary thing that happens when we're young. We're little, we're looking for dad. We're looking for answers. Why am I here? Who am I? What am I worth? We don't know we're asking those. You don't see a 5-year-old come and say, "Hey, Dad, what am I worth?" Right? We don't consciously have those. But they're there, they're deep. God put them in us because he wanted to answer them. And in his design, he developed a father to be the primary person to answer those things correctly. But we live in a fallen world with fallen people. And so our dads, even as good as they were, I always say, there were some good dads out there. None of them were Jesus Christ. All of our dads made mistakes. And some of them made major mistakes. And so God designed our hearts to receive that answer. See, a child must have a father, not only physically. When I said, the universe is wired around the idea of a father is the one that brings the seed. The mother is the one that hosts the seed and develops it and nurtures it. So a father's role, even in biology, every child has DNA from a father and a mother, but from a father. But our soul, our hearts have this DNA too. This DNA that's passed down from our dads. And that's how we learn this father image that we have. And it's non-negotiable. And no matter what kind of man or what kind of fathering he did, everyone has this soul DNA. We have those answers that we got. And so that grid that we have, that foundational grid that we look at everything through, influences everything, and it influences at this most significant point how we interpret God as a father. So Jesus, on one hand, is inviting us to go, hey, you have this opportunity to have this kind of connection with a father. But here we are over here, and we've got this grid that's been formed from our experiences with Dad, whether he was good, bad, missing, for whatever reason. And so when we hear that invitation, part of it probably sounds good. A lot of it probably sounds good. But we've got this grid, this normal that we've experienced that keeps us from understanding what that really means and how to really experience it. Even if we get parts of it and it looks attractive, we've got this baggage, these weights that are dragging us down. And so we have to understand what those are so that we can release them, so that we can have them healed, so we can have them be restored, so we can begin to move closer and closer to that destination. And so those answers to those core questions is where it starts. And so let me tell you a little bit of my story and how this played out for me. I was born in Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee area, out in the country. And when I was I was the last kid of 3, 2 older sisters, so I'm the only boy. And so when I was a young boy, up to about 6 years old, Dad and I were like this, right? I was this boy. We lived out on a farm. We had animals. We had a big garden with a tractor. And so I lived this little boy life, in the dirt. That was great. And then when I started going to elementary school for 2nd grade, my dad had to go to work 2nd shift. He worked he was a grounds, like a freight guy at the airport in Chattanooga, so he had to go to work, and he got moved to 2nd shift. It wasn't his choice. He was putting food on the table. And so suddenly in about 1st, 2nd grade, when I'm starting to see him less because now I'm in school, he suddenly starts working 2nd shift. And so when I would leave for school in the morning, he was still asleep. And then when I would get home from school, he was gone to work. But when I went to bed, he was still at work, and he could get home at 11 o'clock midnight. And so this started this whole season of my young life where Dad was just gone, and I didn't see him. And occasionally, I'd see him on a weekend, even though he was in the same house, but I just didn't see him. And right in that time period, it's kind of hard to go, where's a critical time period in a child's life? Yes, all of them, right? I was just speaking to a guy yesterday at our men's breakfast who lost his dad at 13. Is there a good age to lose your dad? One of my other buddies lost his dad when he was 7. Our friend named Paul came home from school and saw all the people from town in his driveway and was like, what's going on? And the county medical or coroner guy pulled him aside and said, sorry, your dad died, Well, 7 better? I mean, there's no age. So in a kid's life, for me, at that time period, I'm now in school. You're exposed to a different world. And so even though there's not a good time, there are certain transitional times that carry some more impact. A kid going from, literally, we were in the country, going from playing in the dirt to suddenly having to get up and go to school, that's a transition period, right? And so I'm in this transition period, suddenly Dad's gone, I don't see him, we're not spending time together, and then he also got, when there was a period of time, a couple of years into that, where he actually got really sick, and he was sick for a couple of years. Like in bed sick. And so he was gone, and then when he was home because he was sick, he was in bed. And so I had this whole childhood of 6, 7, 8 years old where Dad just wasn't around for me. And I have vivid memories of playing alone outside and just me. And so I started to learn, okay, I'm kind of on my own. Again, no fault of my dad, but you're a kid. You don't do that in math. You don't go, I'm alone, but Dad's sick and he didn't choose to be sick, or my dad's working second shift, but he's putting food on the table. You don't think like that. You're a little kid and you're going, I want Dad. Dad's not around. And so I naturally started looking for other father figures. And so we had some neighbors that were really fun neighbors, and they had 2 boys. One was my age, and so and they had a cool dad. He was the dad. He was fit. My dad was not. He was tan. My dad was Irish and Indian, so he was tan. And he was he was a coach. He was all the things a cool dad does, right? And so I naturally started going, well, my dad's not there. I'm going to go over here. And so I started going over to my neighbor's house all the time because I thought if I can get him to bring me into the fold, and again, you're not, at that age, you're not consciously doing this stuff, right? This is me looking back going, what happened there? You're just going, that there's a dad figure, and you gravitate because that's how you're wired. And so so I tried to fit in there. Well, they had an uncle, and the uncle was the cool uncle too. He had a ski boat. He lived on a lake. He was the cool uncle, and he would come up every weekend. So it wasn't long before the cool uncle kind of pulled me into being one of the cool nephews. He even called me his adopted nephew. When he would hand out, when he was leaving for the weekend, he would call my 2 buddies, his nephews, over and say, hey, here's a couple bucks. Go get yourself some ice cream this week or whatever. And pretty soon he was like, hey, come here, and here's a couple bucks. He'd give them to me. And so, again, my heart's getting pulled to father figures. And my dad being sick, I never learned how to throw a football. I never learned to do, I learned to do a lot of stuff, but that was stuff I just never learned to do. And so this, first the neighbor's father, and then the uncle, he taught me how to throw a football. He taught me how to water ski. And he taught me all these things. Well, little did I know that he was also grooming me. And so within about a year of first meeting him and kind of getting pulled into the family, he started calling me his special nephew. And then started pulling me aside even more, and a little bit more, and isolating me. And then he started sexually abusing me. And that started when I was about 8.5 years old. And it went on for several years. And so suddenly, the whole experience of what a father or father figure is just shattered. It's just shattered. And the thing that was that kind of capped this whole experience is when I turned 12 years old, 12 and a half years old, my dad got transferred. We were going to move to Florida. And about a year prior to that, my mom started to suspect maybe something was going on. So to give you an idea of our family dynamic, it took 2.5 years for my mom, 3.5 years for my mom to go, is something going on here? That was my family dynamic. I was on my own. And so my mom confronted me one day and said, is something going on between you and this gentleman? And, 3.5 years of angst, hiding, trying to figure out how do I get out of this. I finally said, yes, something's going on. And my mom didn't do anything. She said, well, just try to stay away from him. And in my little mind at 11, I said, what do you think I've been doing for 3 years? And then I found out later my dad knew, and he didn't do anything. And so it stopped because we moved. We changed towns. We moved, from Chattanooga to Orlando, Florida. And so that experience, and then going into moving there, new town, now I'm in junior high school, my teenagehood was filled with a lot of rage, a lot of anger. I turned to pornography. By the time I was 16, 17, I was suicidal. I had weeks where I'd be driving and see the tree or the telephone pole and just be like, I'm not sure why I don't just turn the wheel and go. And I mention all that because that was that childhood. As tragic as it was, it left a grid that has played out almost my entire life. Because when I think about the questions that a boy has, that a girl has, a child has, looking to a dad, I got answers, because we all get answers. My answers were, what's my identity? One of the things when I was little, there was a show, and some of you will know this show, and some of you won't know the show, but there was a show when I was really little that was at the end of its time, but it was called the Howdy Doody Show. Anybody remember that show? You can show your age if you know. So it was a little puppet. It was like a marionette or something like that. I think that's what they were called. And it was this little kind of red-headed, freckled. Well, I was much more red-headed and freckled when I was a kid, and I actually had 2 freckles right by the corners of my mouth, and so I looked like that doll. At least I thought I did. And being a smaller, I know I'm extremely tall now, but you wouldn't believe when I was little, I was not the tallest kid in the class. I was a really small, really thin, raily little kid. And so when I looked in the mirror, what I saw was this puppet. And so, and all the experiences of my childhood made me feel like that, puppet. And so if you ask me, what was my identity? If you had said, who are you? My answer was, I was the misfit toy boy. That's what I was. I was just a misfit, but I was a toy to be played with by others, whatever they wanted to do. I had no choice in the matter. That's who I was. And what's my worth? What am I worth? What's my value? I'm only valuable to be used for another's purpose. I'm disposable. That was my worth. I'm disposable. And what's my destiny? I thought my destiny would be to be alone and forgotten. That was the answers to my questions, to my heart's questions. And so now all of us don't have my story, but you have your story. And maybe your story had tragedy that mine did, and maybe it didn't. But all of us got answers to those questions. All of us did. And we have to uncover, we have to unearth, what were those answers? What were the things that I got? And I want to caution you. I'm not trying to say you all had a bad dad, right? And you may have thought he was good, but he's bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying as a kid, we experience things that as an adult we can look back and go, oh, I understand now that he was working second shift. He wasn't trying to abandon me. For God's sakes, he would say, that's the word. I wouldn't want to do that. However, as a kid, we interpret what's happening. And so this isn't about, was my dad good or bad? This is about, how did I experience life as a kid? What answers did I get, whether intentioned or not? What experiences, what answers did I receive? Did I interpret? Those are the ones we have to go after. We have to start there, because those foundational answers are the key to unlocking, ultimately, how we experience God as a true Father. Because if you think about the answers I gave for my story, do you think God sees me as a misfit toy boy? Of course he doesn't. But you know what? As I said at the beginning, there's a long way from here to here. And I lived for nearly 40 years, growing up physically, but still stuck with this identity that I learned, that I adopted, that I took on those answers.